Hi everyone, my name is Stefan. I'm a wedding photographer and videographer. Not sure if you noticed, but there seems to be a new trend in the videography industry. People switching from Sony back to Canon. While they certainly have their good reasons, we wanted to tell you our opinion about that. To make it short, I think it's a terrible idea. Also, we have a 5D Mark IV in the studio, so we'll compare it to a Sony A7 Mark II. The last couple of months, I noticed a lot of people are switching back from Sony to Canon. First of all, I always said that camera brands don't matter. While some people might see me as a little too focused on gear, here is why I try to learn as much as I can about gear. The more I know about it, the better I am able to use it. It's always just a tool. But as any other tool, the more you know about it, the better your results using it will be. I would argue that you can create amazing videos with any camera if you know how to use it. Most cameras on the market today are very capable of shooting amazing footage, especially if you know how to use them. It makes more sense to use a camera that you like working with, instead of buying what other people are saying is the best. If you want a more classic feel to a camera, get a Fuji. If you shoot mostly photos, Nikon might be your brand. Sony has always felt more technical and the feature set is a little overwhelming at first. Here is how I switched to Sony. When Kai and I were about to photograph and film a wedding in Mexico, we were trying to find a camera that could shoot 120 frames per second in full HD. So we could slow down the footage to about 25%. That kind of slow motion can make your footage look way more cinematic. It looks just larger than life. We ended up buying a Sony A6300 and we were super happy with the results. At the time, I was also looking for a second full-frame camera. I wanted a two-camera setup to photograph weddings. It was early in 2016 and the Sony A7R II was one of the best cameras on the market for photo and video. I decided to go with a mix of Canon and Sony, so the A7R II quickly became my main camera. I liked it so much that I would buy a second one in the 2017 season. I sold the Canon since I didn't use it anymore. So now I shoot on 3 Sony bodies most of the time. My neighbor Steve, who happens to be a photographer as well, borrowed me a 5D Mark IV for a day. I had already played with it before, and to be honest, I have no desire to go back to Canon at all. These are 2 claims people make when they go back to Canon. The colors are better, the autofocus in video is a little better. It's true that the Canon colors have a certain look that is very pleasing and also very easy to recognize. The Sony, in comparison, gives you a lot more to work with in terms of color grading and dynamic range. The sun comes out in the middle of your shot. A lot of times you're able to turn down the highlights and the overall exposure, and it looks fine. The Mark IV has been out for a while, so I won't do an in-depth review anymore. But this is why I think most of what Canon is offering is just not on par with Sony. Most important for video would be there is no sensor image stabilization, while my Sony A7R II is always stabilized with whatever native or adapted lens. Handheld video with Canon needs at least a stabilized lens. With Sony, I can also film while holding it up to the eye using the electronic viewfinder. That is another way to stabilize it further and having a better idea of the composition. For photo, the eye autofocus would be the feature I would miss the most using the Canon. Especially with candidates and any kind of portrait photography is extremely helpful. Sony's eye autofocus tracks the eye while you just hold down the focus button. Even shooting with a very shallow depth of field, you will pretty much always have the eye itself in focus. With the Canon, I would sometimes find myself having the eyelash in focus instead of the eye itself when shooting, for example, headshots. While the 5D Mark IV offers 4K, it is pretty much unusable. It takes a lot of storage without really being better quality. You can only fit a couple of minutes on a 32GB SD card. I still deliver my videos in Full HD since I prefer slow motion for my wedding videography. But 4K helps me a lot if I film interviews or speeches. I'm able to crop if I need to, and it looks better even if I downgrade it to Full HD later. So while there might be good reasons to keep using Canon for videos. I would argue that switching back from Sony is a weird idea. Sony tweaked the colors of the A7R III, so they are actually improving their out-of-camera colors. Sony is by far the best brand if you're shooting video and photo. After picking up the 5D Mark IV and playing around with it, I'm so glad that I don't have to use Canon anymore.